evening. Welcome to the Town of Avon Advisory Planning Commission meeting. If you are interested in having a copy of the agenda or the staff reports, they are available on the tables to the right of the audience. We will be conducting business as outlined on the agenda. From time to time, the board may deviate from the agenda. As president of this body, I will inform those in attendance of any deviations. Excuse me. This meeting is being recorded for the public record. Because of this, we request that personal conversations are kept to a minimum and all cell phones are set to vibrate with any phone calls taken outside of the chambers. If you are interested in commenting during the public hearing, please sign up on the sheets located on the tables to the right of the audience. When your name is called, please step forward to the podium and state your name and address for the record. Please address your comments to the board and not to the staff or to the petitioner. Your comments should relate directly to the case at hand. Responses to public comments will be given once the hearing is closed. We do understand that there may be several persons who wish to speak. In order to keep the meeting running in a timely fashion, we would request that you not repeat previous comments. Thank you for your assistance in facilitating a respectful, fair, and timely meeting. Again, welcome, and please stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's do our roll call.
Harold Eisen. Here. Howard Pope.
Here.
Dave Kaufman. Absent. Mason Pike.
Here.
Catherine Ranford.
Here.
Paul Kuchenberger.
Here.
Greg Susan.
Present.
Do we have a quorum?
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Has everybody had, we're moving on to the approval of the meeting minutes. Has everybody had an opportunity to review the meeting minutes from July 25th of this year?
One comment, I'd ask the staff to not use a large font. I'd like to go 4 font if we could on these.
That was a formatting error with our new system. I have revised, there's a revised one on Catherine's desk that you'll sign, but I knew that was coming. I knew it.
I asked.
Do we have any other comments or proposed edits or changes to the meeting minutes?
I won't point out your typos or anything like that.
It's going to be one of those evenings, isn't it?
Making a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, we now get into the public. Now going to the public comments section, and this is the opportunity for the public to comment on items that are not on the agenda. Does anybody have anything they'd like to say about anything that is not on the agenda this evening? Could you please state your name and address?
Bob Culler, 1483 Laurel Oak Avenue in Avon. I want to make some comments regarding plan unit developments. I understand you're having your training session later on, but this is in regards to being on the steering committee for the UDO and what we took into consideration and thought about when we were doing there. Historically, what has happened in Avon, I'm going back a number of years, that a PUD would come about, a plan unit development, and it would include a commercial lot on the outside edge of a development. And what we've seen over time is those lots were never developed because they didn't have anybody coming in that respect. So when we looked at that from our UDO steering committee standpoint, even the developer said the developers have abused the PUD system in Avon. So we looked at it from the standpoint of the definition. And so bear with me, and I want to read the definition that's in the UDO. A development occurring on a parcel under single ownership or unified control that is developed as a unit and is mapped as a zoning district in or of itself. A planned unit development includes 2 or more principal buildings or uses. The key phrase there is developed as a unit. And we looked at that from that standpoint of saying, no, an outside commercial lot on the edge of a property is not part of that unit. And that's what the steering committee felt in that respect, that it needed to be tied together. Example would be our Eastern Gray project, where we have the Riverwalk District, where there's mixed housing as well as retail and our future civic center there. So we feel that is a very important key concept for everyone to understand and what the intent of the steering committee was going for at that point in time. So hope to take that into consideration when a PUD comes up. I believe it's coming up in the next couple planning meetings. Forget about it. If you don't think about it or do think about it, read the definition again and focus on developed as a unit. And I appreciate you. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak to anything that is not on tonight's agenda? Has anybody signed up, Ian?
No.
Okay. That being said, public comments are closed. We now move on to the request for continuances or agenda modifications. Mr. Peoples.
Yeah, we have 3 requests for a continuance this evening. The first one is DPR 2207 Avon Retail Center. You all may have remembered that this one has been on the agenda a couple other times. The petitioner is acquiring a portion of the shopping center and wants to do an addition on the shopping center rather than a standalone building, which is what this is. Talking to the petitioner, they're still in the middle of the real estate issue. And so they haven't even started design yet until they complete the real estate transaction. And in talking to them, we just felt that it was prudent just to continue it out for 3 months to the November 28th, 2022 hearing date. The second one on the agenda is the Cityscape Avon Planned Unit Development. That one right there, the petitioners requested a continuance to the September meeting. And then the third one is the Glen Rock Springs Development. That one, with the agenda that you have in your packet, shows that for hearing today more than likely, and that's because they had requested the continuance this morning. And they're requesting a continuance to the September 26th meeting as well. The petitioner is here on the Glen Rock Springs development. And so if you have any questions for him, then he's available. The other petitioners, I do not believe, are here.
But the Village Place Townhomes in Siskin Pines is still on the agenda? Correct?
No, so those are withdrawals. So there's 2 items on the agenda that have been withdrawn, ZA 2206, the Village Place Townhomes, and the ZA 2211, which is Siskin Pines. Both of those petitions have been withdrawn from further consideration.
So we are basically, we have no new business, no old business.
Correct. Yep.
All right. Okay, then let's moving on. No new business, no old business. We move on to other business, which is the resolution for Avon Economic Development.
One second,
Area.
Kathy. We need to make motions and approve these for
Okay.
continuances. And we need to do those one at a time.
You can do all 3 at once if you choose.
Do we have a motion to continue DPR 2207, PUD 2202, and ZA 2209?
So moved.
We have a second?
Second.
Okay.
Do we need to be specific on when, since they have varying dates on the continuances?
Just say as requested.
So moved as requested to requested dates.
Second.
Let's take a vote.
Harold Weiser.
4.
Robert Bo.
4.
Dave Cochran is absent. Mason Pike.
4.
Catherine Randberg.
4.
Paul Gutenberg.
4.
Greg Newsom.
4.
Okay.
Could I ask Bill a quick question?
Yeah.
From a docket management perspective, do you guys track these requests for extensions and spacing them out? Like is September looking like a heavy month or?
I have started to put the draft agenda on everybody's places for the next meeting agenda, because I figured, yeah, you don't want to see another, 8, 9 item plan commission agenda. So I believe the September meeting has 5 items on the agenda. A couple of them are fairly simple, but there's 2 that are somewhat controversial.
That's appreciated. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay. All right, then now we move on to the resolution for Avon Economic Development Area expansion in Easton Gray allocation areas.
Thank you. This right here is a request from the town on behalf of the Redevelopment Commission. The petitioner's request.
Forgive me 1 second, Bill.
Yep.
We still have ZA 2206 and ZA 2211, the withdrawals. We didn't include those in that motion.
We don't.
We
need to
just
include
mentioned the
withdrawals, do we?
continuances.
You just have to acknowledge the withdrawal.
Oh,
Yeah.
apologies. My apologies then.
Okay.
I'm sorry. We do request that the Plan Commission determine that the declaratory resolution for the expansion of the Avon Economic Development Area and the creation of the Easton Gray allocation areas conform to the comprehensive plan and of the development of the town, and approve that resolution. What this is an expansion of what we call the Avon Economic Development Area. And to give you a little bit of background, some of you may know, some of you may not. We're talking about essentially TIF districts here, tax increment financing districts. And tax increment financing districts are broken down into 2 parts. One is the economic development area, which is the area into which the increment can be spent. And then there are allocation areas that are created from those economic development areas where you collect the increment from. And so what has happened in the recent past is the Redevelopment Commission has approved a declaratory resolution that would expand the Avon Economic Development Area and then create 5 allocation areas within the Easton Gray Plan Unit development as part of that economic development area. The Plan Commission's role in this particular instance is merely to determine whether or not the proposed development is consistent with the comprehensive plan and approve the proposed development from that limited perspective, approve or dispose of that request from that limited perspective. So some of the other elements associated, maybe the more controversial elements of a TIF district, are not really under the purview of the Plan Commission. What the Plan Commission is looking for, does the development comply with the comprehensive plan? And if it does, then the Plan Commission's really role is to forward it on to the Redevelopment Commission and the Town Council with an approval. As an example, just to give you an idea, the town has 4 economic developments in it. Economic development areas. The largest one is the Avon Economic Development Area, which is right here in these multiple shades of red. There's a little orange one right here, which is the Hendricks Regional Health Economic Development Area. There's the Avon Landing Development up here, or EDA up here. And then there's the Reagan Logistics EDA down here. So there are 4 different economic developments within the town, and each of those has been subdivided up into allocation areas. And that's why the red that you see there, the different shades of red, are the different allocation areas within that economic development area. Hendricks Regional Health, the economic development area and the allocation area are the same. There have been 2 economic development or allocation areas created up here in Reagan Logistics, and one down here, in Avon Landing, and one down here in Reagan Logistics. What this proposal would do is expand the Avon EDA, and you see it right here. Now, what we've done in this exhibit is we've taken the right-of-way out of the, that's the reason it doesn't look contiguous. But if you include the right-of-way within the Avon EDA, it is all contiguous. And what we would do is add the Easton Gray development into this economic development area to expand this EDA into another section. Additionally, with that, the Redevelopment Commission would create 5 allocation areas within the Easton Gray development. A Riverwalk District 1 and 2 down here, and a HOPA area right here, dealing with the age-restricted community on the west side of the Eastern Gray development. The anticipated, now the reason for creating this sort of layered or phased approach is because when you issue a bond associated with one of these economic development areas, it starts a clock of 25 years where the allocation area would then expire. And so you don't want to bond the whole thing at once and then get to this development up here, maybe, in about 10 years and only have 15 years running on the clock. So what you do is you issue a bond in these individual allocation areas, and then develop that, and then issue another bond so that the 25 years starts with each allocation area. With respect to the Plan Commission's role in this, the ask is, does this development comply with the comprehensive plan? For that, I forwarded you here the actual preliminary master plan for the Easton Gray Economic Development, or the Easton Gray Development, which the Plan Commission forwarded to the council with a favorable recommendation. This is the Riverwalk District down here. It's identical. The AAs 1 and 2 of the Riverwalk District are consistent with the shape of this. And of course, the HOPA areas are right here, 1, 2, and 3. And the shape of those allocation areas are consistent with those developments. With respect to the comprehensive plan, this is what the Plan Commission essentially forwarded to the town council, that the proposal of the Easton Gray development was largely consistent with the intent and letter of the comprehensive plan, and generally meets or exceeds the standards of the zoning subdivision control ordinance, and will be consistent with the accepted drainage ordinances and standards. And so for that, the staff does request that the Plan Commission confirm that the declaratory resolution and plan approved by the Avon Redevelopment Commission conforms to the comprehensive plan, and approves said resolution and plan. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
And I might just add that this case is kind of an easy one, because not every TIF allocation area involves property which you've already seen in a rezone or a PUD. This project you're very familiar with, but the process exists because you may not have been consulted about a particular project that's going to involve a TIF, and so that's why this process exists. And after your order, the matter has to go to the town council for its approval of the TIF as well. And then it goes back to the RDC for a confirmatory resolution. So you are part of the checks and balances to make sure that allocation areas are not being created with development that the town doesn't want. So that's your role in this case, but you've seen this and you are familiar with the project, so that helps.
The other question I have, Bill, so why not create a separate TIF rather than merging it with the existing one?
I think that was just the preference of the redevelopment commission and the council, that they would just expand the TIF rather than create a standalone TIF. It is possible that you would capture some of the revenue from the Easton Gray TIF and use it in other areas of the economic development area, as long as that supports that part of the economic development area. So that's usually why you would add to a TIF district rather than create a standalone. So you can use that increment in a different area than just the Easton Gray development itself.
And vice versa. So TIF revenue from the old TIF can also be used if it serves Easton Gray. So it creates a two-way street there in terms of sharing of that revenue. Gives you more power in terms of development, what the RDC can do, probably in between those two areas.
Sounds like it also gives a lot more flexibility with the use of TIF funds. Are there any downsides to incorporating this into the pre-existing TIF as opposed to having it be a standalone TIF?
No, it's also easier to make it part of the existing allocation process rather than creating a new one. It's a little administratively a little easier as well, but now I know of no downsides unless it didn't have contiguity.
Which this does. Okay. Discussion? I mean, this has been in front of us. I think we've had at least 2 presentations from the developer so far.
Jared, I think it's mine. Mic number 7 is touchy. So I think our duty here is to make sure that essentially that it conforms to our comp plan. Bill, what's the comp plan speak for this area?
Comprehensive plan in this area, boy, let me see, going off the top of my head, single family residential, and then a town center. But the balance of it has no overt recommendation. So there was like 15% of it was town center. Another area was some residential development, but then the vast majority of it had no recommendation. And so the idea behind that then is you can either extend a recommendation that exists, or you can use the underlying zoning. The underlying zoning was R1, the vast majority of places that were that did not have an overt recommendation were zoned R1 and planned for single family residential development. So that's why we considered the Easton Gray development consistent with the comprehensive plan recommendation.
I feel like I agree with that. Does sound like it meets the comp plan. Thank you.
Do we have any further questions for Mr. Peoples or Mr. Taylor? Would anybody like to propose a motion?
I'll make a motion. We approve recommend approval, approve the order for Avon Economic Development Area Expansion and Easton Gray allocation areas as presented.
Do you have a second?
I would second that motion.
Let's take a vote.
Harold Isaac. Robert O.
4.
Mason Pike. Aye. Catherine Randall.
4.
Paul Whitworth.
4.
Greg Newman.
4.
Motion carries.
And I believe unless there's some other new business that needs to be brought to the attention of the commission, any committee reports?
Well, I've got to give you my report on the administrative approval.
Okay.
And we had one case in the intervening month where we approved a deviation from what the Plan Commission approved. It was Lot 7 in Harvest Landing. The easternmost tenant space wants to put in a breakfast cafe type of land use that has, it's not really it's a roofed seating area, but it's sort of open to the outside. It's in your packet, the renderings of it. They did a really good job of matching the design of the building, and it was a 600 square foot seating area that'll be open on the sides anyway. And so the plan, the administrator, I approved that. In the what date was that?
This is the First Watch restaurant.
11th, yeah, First Watch.
Okay.
First Watch, it's like a breakfast cafe type of thing.
Mhm.
And so it's the 11th day of August 2022. We approved that administratively.
Okay. Any questions on the administrative approval? Do we have any, it looks like we're going to move on to our training, which actually is part of this meeting.
Yeah, remember at the last meeting, we talked a little bit about holding a special meeting to have training. And as cases dropped off this agenda, one right after the other, it became clear that we could hold the annual training as part of this meeting rather than call a special meeting, which I think is probably the preference of most people anyway. We're going to split this up into two pieces. One is is my piece, and what I'm merely going to do is go over the rules of procedure, or some highlights of the rules of procedure. And so you should have a handout on your places where I've highlighted some of the sections of the rules of procedure. The first, yeah.
If I could.
Yep.
I've searched for the rules of procedure online. Are
Okay.
these posted online?
They may not be. We did transition over to a different server, so we may have to put those on there.
Either that, or could I request a hard copy
Yeah.
at some future meeting, please?
Yeah, we can get copies of the rules to you. First item on that I've highlighted, and what I'm just going to do is go through these fairly quickly, just as an information dump more than anything, and then take any of your questions concerning some of the issues of the rules of procedure that are unique to Avon. First and foremost, your meetings. As you all are aware, the meetings shall adjourn by 11:30, unless the president allows a meeting to extend beyond the time. And the Plan Commission is not supposed to begin a new consideration of an agenda item after 11 o'clock unless the commission by majority vote waives this requirement. So you do have the option, of course, if you're past 11 and a new item's on the agenda, you do have to vote to go forward. And you're, by the rule, not supposed to extend beyond 11:30. The second page is just sort of a standard thing. Sometimes it's confusing, and I just want to reiterate the fact that a quorum is a majority of the total membership of the commission, which this commission is a 7-member commission, and to have a quorum, you have to have at least 4 members. However, a vote is also a majority of the total membership of the commission. So you couldn't just do a majority vote of 4 members and have an official action. You actually have to have at least 4 members vote in the affirmative in order for you to have an official action on a petition. The next one, it deals with the timing, and this was the one that we sort of, like Hamlet, honor more in the breach than the observance. And this, there is in your rules of procedure time limits on presentations that stand before you. The petitioner has 10 minutes to provide with you a presentation, and then persons or groups who have registered against the proposal shall be provided a total of 10 minutes to present objectives. And in that, if you have someone representing a group, they're supposed to have a cap of 5 minutes. If you're having someone representing an individual, they should have a cap of 3 minutes apiece. The persons then, and this is one that we don't really do that often, but if there are people who are in support of the petition and that have registered in support of the petition, they also have 10 minutes to speak. So they aren't necessarily part of the petitioner's presentation, but they're sort of a standalone element. And this is sort of unique for Avon. I haven't seen this one very often, where people who are in favor of petition also have 10 minutes to come before you and speak against it. And then the petitioner has a rebuttal period of 5 minutes. And there is a cap on the total presentation time of 35 minutes. Now, obviously, as you all are well aware, we breach this occasionally, especially on controversial petitions. And there's good reason for it. I mean, you start cutting people off and they're going to think the fix is in or something like that. But your rules do have specific requirements for timing of petitions.
Bill, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
So to that point, could we potentially, as a commission, that we're opening up, comment, tee up the time limitations? I mean, the strict side of me wants to put up a shot clock. I know that's not, what we're gonna do, but it says shall, it doesn't say
Right.
may, it's shall. So I wonder if it would be helpful if we do open up to comments, we remind folks, you've got 5 minutes, you've got 3 minutes per person.
I think that's an excellent idea.
So would you say that that's something we might put in the beginning of like when you do your thing, or do
I
you?
think it would be good to say at the beginning, not only at the the initial spiel, but also when we get to the public hearing, insert a reminder that, as we get to each agenda item and we open it up to public hearing, this is a reminder that these are the time parameters.
Yeah.
And then someone's going to have to be the clock watcher. I don't know who that should be.
Well, honestly, I do. So most of the time I'm sitting over here and I know it looks like I'm looking on my phone, but I actually have a timer set for them. I haven't ever enforced it, but I do run a timer during your meetings.
I think it would be perfectly appropriate if someone has a limit of 2 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever, to give them a 30-second notice. I mean,
Paul,
We tried the shot clock in the past.
oh, yeah?
And it wasn't very good technically, but I would think for some reason it didn't survive after several meetings.
yeah, the rules also say that the chair has latitude. I think you're hitting on some good points, but I think we have to have a little bit of nuance. So the first thing we should try to do is make sure that our staff tells petitioners early in the process, when you go before our plan commission, you'll have 10 minutes. Your proposal should be 10 minutes. Sometimes the presentations are much longer. And so we could solve part of our time problem by just advising them. I like your idea of reading at the beginning. Our rules say petitioner will have 10 minutes to make their case. Person speaking in support will have 10 minutes. People speaking against will have 10 minutes. And then there'll be rebuttal of 5 minutes. I think that's a good thing so that creates an expectation. But as Paul, I think Paul was the only one here during that certain case that we had to move to the school and have 17 meetings about, was that when you have 164 people show up to talk, you're not going to do that. You're not going to be able to do that. So you need to have some flexibility. The chair needs to be able to say, okay, we've got ourselves a situation here. We've got 164 people signed up. So we're going to say you have 3 minutes and we're just going to do the best we can. And then when you do that, the shot clock does become kind of important though, and we used it in that situation.
Is there a mechanism in this article or section or is that within the power of the chair to say, due to the overwhelming response and the attendance tonight, we are going to extend our response time from a total of 10 minutes, which is supposed to be everybody, to a total of 20 minutes? Would that be within, or?
I think if you have 164 people and you give everyone 18 seconds, you're going to have people throwing things at you. I just think they're going to be time. I know that sounds crazy, but Paul and I lived it. You have to just do your best. The courts say that in order to honor the open door law, that you may establish reasonable rules limiting dialogue. It doesn't say you can eliminate dialogue or that you can make unreasonable time restraints. And so what I have recommended in the past, and we've always done, is, 5 minutes a person. If there are going to be 2 people speak, nobody cares. If you've got 20 people, 3 minutes is about as short as I think you can go. And you'll find people have a very difficult time saying what they want to say in 3 minutes, because in the first minute, they're going to tell you how they don't have enough time to say what they want to say. And so I just would encourage you to let the chair exercise her discretion and handle it the best you can when you have an unusual circumstance.
Okay.
I do like your idea of pointing out what your rules are, though, to set some expectations, but you're going to have to be flexible, or you're going to have people say that they weren't allowed the opportunity to speak. And we don't want that.
Perhaps it would be better just to point out that we're going to stick strictly to the 3-minute minimum, and or maximum, 3-minute maximum for individual speakers, as opposed to, like you said, if there's only 2 people in the audience, it's
easier.
Something that we find out, that we've seen before too, and you can kind of read the room and know the cases that are coming up, that we're here to we represent the town, so sometimes we got to give that time. And as we go into it, kind of where I think you're going, Catherine, I would agree with it. Even as we go through this, it's reminding people not to repeat what has been said before. So when you do that, that'll start to naturally limit that discussion. And I don't think it would hurt that Jared come up with a way to show the time up on the screen. That could be a clock that.
We could have
it
him
could
just stand
be
back with
unobtrusive.
signs,
But-
paddles that.
But it really is that we gotta let the public have a chance to speak, or we won't make it out of the building, because they'll capture us and give us their opinion on the way out.
Kidnap us.
Well, you're gonna get whatever number of people that sign up, and you're right, you're gonna have duplicated sayings, and some of them are gonna say, okay, you've already heard that, I'll, remove myself. So you just gotta get through that first wave. I think once you get through that, then everything else kind of settles in.
Well, the math is, so it's 10 minutes, there's a total of 35 minutes, right? And so if you say, I mean, that pretty much, well, I agree, like, there's flexibility that the chair needs to exercise. I was thinking, well, listen, math is the math. If there's only 10 minutes for public comment, then it's 10 minutes and whatever. But I think, yeah, the chair can exercise her discretion. But within that 35 minutes, we can keep within that 35 minutes. I think that will.
I mean, if we're getting into, I think it would be sort of like being given a time limit in court. If we are at 45 minutes, I think it would be appropriate for the chair to say, we're going to take 2 more comments. We're 10 minutes over our, no, you don't think so?
Can't do it. You have to allow everybody who wants to speak the right to speak.
So we
That's
just
the
have to
point I'm
be
trying to
very,
make, yeah.
so we just have to really put guardrails on that maximum amount of time and just say, your 3 minutes are up, thank you.
If I can, I think the challenge you're trying to present here is you're trying to find the nights where we don't have anybody, as well as the nights where we have 164 petitioners. And unfortunately, those rules are separate, completely separate.
Well, the other
This is
thing,
where the flexibility is needed in your position to recognize that tonight we don't have anybody. So who cares? Come up here and talk for 5 minutes. It really doesn't matter. But when you have 164 people, hey, we've got a lot of people here. We are going to hold you to 3 minutes and cut them off. You manage that at the individual level.
so Dan, do we have any?
Flexibility is what you need.
So does the flexibility protect us from treating like citizens in unlike ways, if you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I think you're okay. I mean, I think that, it's really an art. I mean, I've been to hundreds of these meetings, and sometimes when they get out of time, you say, well, I'm sorry, your time's up. Could you please wrap up? And some people will and some people won't. And at the Fairwood case, someone was escorted out by the police because she wouldn't stop talking. And she went about 10 minutes, and the chair was very polite and kept saying, ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to finish up. And she said something like, no, I will not shut up. I will be heard, and you will sit there until I'm done talking. And that's that's the only time in my entire practice of law I've ever seen anyone escorted from the room. It wasn't because she was acting badly, it's because she refused to recognize any time limitation. And that was very controversial. But there were about 300 people in the room.
And
And
it's disrespectful of the other people who also wanted to be heard.
Oh, I think she was just being disrespectful of the Plan Commission. Don't you, Paul? Don't you? I don't think she meant any disrespect to anyone else. I think she was hammering the Plan Commission. And, but she just went on and on and on and on. And so I just think, I agree with Robert. I think, I'm going to talk a little bit in my training about how you can limit, how cases should move a little faster in some circumstances. I think that will help. But yeah, on the cases where you don't have, if you have one person here to talk against a case and they've talked for 10 minutes, then you have the right to say, the 10 minutes is up. Could you please try to wrap up your remarks? And because there's no need to have one person talk for 20 minutes. Now, that being said, that's why it's also important to limit how much the petitioners talk. Because if you let them talk for 30 minutes and then which has happened, and then you have people who want to talk that you're trying to limit, you're in for a world of trouble. We had this happen once, and the speaker got up and said, I just don't know why he got to talk for an hour and we get 10 minutes. And you don't want that. And that's why I think it's important staff gets that message out early to petitioners. Hey, look, you have 10 minutes, you're going to talk, and then you're going to sit down, and then everybody else will talk, and then you'll get 5 minutes. It's important to know that the petitioners often think that if they just talk a lot, they can wear you down. Okay, and there are some attorneys who come before you, or some developers who you just wonder, is that guy ever going to sit down? But see, he thinks he's in control as long as he's got the mic. And so we also had to create that expectation that, hey, it's 10 minutes, you've got a lot to say, whatever, organize it so you can say it in 10 minutes. That will save you a lot of time that you guys spend here.
Maybe we should make it a requirement that everyone that's on the planning commission has to have raised toddlers.
There you go. So Dan, one question I had stemming from the previous meetings, is we get a lot of good information from the staff. And sometimes it's a very big, matter. And so Bill has to spend a lot of time discussing it, because it's a public record and we've got it in advance. Again, I'm just speaking for myself. If others disagree, I get it. But I could do for a shorter staff presentation, because I've read this stuff, I'm ready. I don't need a long presentation, but unless the others do, or we do it for the public, I get it. But 5 minutes, I'm good.
Yeah, I would be happy to do that. But what I do try to do, so when I give my presentation, I try to give all the objective facts so the petitioner doesn't have to. So the petitioner doesn't have to reiterate, it's zone C2 and blah, blah, blah. He can go straight into the argument for his petition. So when I'm giving my presentation, that's what I'm trying to do. And I try to give the recommendation as sort of an aside. Oh yeah, and we're recommending denial too. But I would be happy to give a shorter presentation.
There are times when I feel like it's getting a little bit into the weeds, but for the most part, I'm pretty happy with your presentations. They're normally 3-4 minutes?
I try to keep them right around I try to keep them 5. If it's a real complex petition, it sometimes goes a little bit longer.
Yeah. Okay.
Not that brevity. It's like one word. Going back on the rules, I figured that was going to be the big one. Just some ideas, just some continuance issues. One, there's a right to one continuance automatically. So if someone requests a continuance, that should be automatic. 2, if you continue a petition longer than 1 month, then then the petitioner has to re-notify. That's in your rules too, which is why you usually see 1 month continuances rather than multiple month continuances. 2, this is sort of a interesting part. These next 2 are interesting parts of your rules. 1, you can't continue anything more than 3 months. So 3 months is your maximum continuance you can give to a petitioner if they want to. And 2, they can be continued no more than 6 months in total. So if they are continued longer than 6 months, they're essentially withdrawn or dismissed, and they have to refile. I think that pretty much summarizes the continuance stuff. There is a provision in here where the planning director can continue a petition without your sort of consent. The only time we do that is it's really a 2-phase test. It's when we've got an agenda that has a lot of cases on it and the petitioner has missed a refiling deadline. Then we tend to continue it to the next meeting and just stick it on the next agenda. So that's the only time you'll see the planning director actually continue one on his own is if we've got a big agenda and the petitioner has missed some sort of refiling deadline. Speaking of refiling, you do have some rules on refiling. Basically, if you're dealing with something that's been withdrawn, they're not supposed to, other than a zoning text amendment or not a zoning text amendment, zoning map amendment, they have a 6-month refiling. And if it's one of the other ones, then they have a 12-month refiling rule, so they're not supposed to be able to refile a case that's substantially similar within those timeframes. And of course, I have the authority to make a determination if a petition is substantially different. That's why Siskin Pines is on your agenda. And I will normally place in the staff report the reason I allowed them to refile. I will say this is the reason that I allowed them to refile. I made the determination that it was substantially different from the original submission. But you do have a refiling rule, so a petitioner can't just get a denial and turn around and refile it immediately and try to wear you down. So those are the highlights of the rules of procedure. There are more in it. About 80% of the rules of procedure are stuff that your staff manages. But those are the highlights and the things that you tend to administer during the meeting itself. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Is there anything in here that you feel needs to be revisited or amended, or that we need to reconsider in any way?
I don't think in the highlighted spots that I had anything that needed to be revisited. I think that there are a couple things elsewhere in the rules that I think need to be revisited. One of them, I don't think we ever have done for the Plan Commission the remote attendance. So I think that the rules need to be amended to allow you to attend remotely.
We've not changed them since they changed the rule.
Yeah. So the Board of Zoning Appeals and the Town Council both have changed their rules of procedure to allow for remote attendance, but the Plan Commission hasn't done that yet. I think we presented it to you, and then we said we were going to do it at a subsequent meeting. We just never put it on the agenda. And there's one other thing, but I can't think on the top of my head what it is.
Okay.
New law?
I'm going to cover it.
Okay.
There'll be one other thing.
Okay. Mr. Taylor.
I'm trained to stand and speak, so I'm going to. Okay, I have a 28-page outline for you. I am not going to read that to you. I'm going to hit some things I think are important. You guys do a good job, and I thought your last meeting, for example, was very, very good. You guys moved through the material quickly. You were right on point. You were on the mark. Did a really good job. It's one of the best meetings I've seen. So you guys do a good job. This training is to remind you of things that you probably already know, but maybe emphasize them. And secondly, to make you better. Okay, we can always be better. Everybody can be better. So I'm going to push you a little bit to do that. So if you look on page 2, this is a summary of the 6 types of cases that you see. When I first started doing this, this would have been the most helpful paper I had. What are the types of cases we do? What action do we take for each? May we impose conditions? May we have waivers? Is it discretionary or non-discretionary? This paper kind of takes everything you do as a plan commission and puts it on one page. So you do rezones, those are discretionary. Planned unit development cases, which I say are just fancy rezones, those are discretionary. Plats, which are ministerial, which means if it complies, it flies. That's the deal. Development plan reviews, ministerial. If it complies, it flies. Comprehensive plan amendments are discretionary because those are legislative acts. And text amendments, also discretionary. That is the bulk of what you do. You do some little weird things, like tonight you did one. An order saying that this TIF is okay because it complies with the intentions of the comp plan. You also do some unsafe building cases. You have a role to play in that, and those don't come up very often in a young town like Avon, but you may see some more of those. So discretion, the review standard, very important. It's important that you know the difference between, is this a discretionary case or ministerial? That is your guide right away. What action For all the discretionary cases, you'll notice if you look at discretionary, all of those, you're making a recommendation to the town council. On the ministerial cases, you are the last word. You decide. Okay. If you look at page 3, some best practices. So the primary thing I wanted to talk about here is focusing questions on statutory factors. Okay, we want questions to be asked of the petitioners because that's how we make findings. However, I would like to see you focus those questions on the elements of the case we're deciding. So for example, if we're doing a plat case, we don't need to ask them, what kind of businesses are these going to be? Doesn't matter. Not one of our factors to look at in a plat case. And I have seen that question here and elsewhere. The other plan commissions I work at, there's this sort of curiosity people have. They want to know everything about it. We don't need to know at a plat case everything we might want to know. So again, I've made a list of examples of good questions for you that you can review and that you might try to get a feel for this. So in a rezone, there are 5 criteria, and those 5 criteria are in about 18 places in these materials. So you're familiar with them, but for example, what will be the impact of your proposed development on traffic in the surrounding area? It will be asked every time in an Avon case, one would think, right? And you can see, what are the land uses immediately around you? That's one of the factors. How will your proposal impact fair market value of land? What does the comprehensive plan say? These are the things that are specifically related to the 5 factors. And so those questions would all be relevant, would all be important. Planned unit development, as Bob Culler said, the UDO changed a little bit about how we talk about the purposes of PUDs. And so if you look at the bottom of page 3, B, C, and D are the new 3 factors that are in addition to the 5 factors we use for a rezone. And so those would be good questions for any PUD. And you can see on page 4, questions for plats, questions for DPRs, and I make these simple. I think the question should be, does your plan comply? Now, Bill is going to make a judgment about that in his review. Staff is going to make a judgment about whether it complies. And that doesn't mean it complies. That's a pretty good chance that it complies after review. However, 2 things happen that might raise additional questions. One is if you can identify some way in which you don't think it complies, fair game. Secondly, sometimes right before the hearing, they tweak their proposal. And sometimes staff doesn't even have a chance to do that, to look at that until the hearing. And so I'm not trying to oversimplify, but I do think that plat cases and DPR cases should be the easy cases. The questions are more narrow. Waivers. Waivers are difficult. Again, I took the language right out of the new UDO about waivers. These 5 questions I have here are directly related to the criteria in your ordinance. So I've done the homework for you. Now, what are examples of bad questions? I hear these all the time. I actually heard one of these recently, not your meeting, and wrote them down. But one is, are you sure you have a market for this product? Not really our business. Aside from the fact that they're going to invest lots of money and we're not going to invest any, it's just not relevant. It's not any of our factors. Does the town need any more of your type of business? I have wrangled with some of you about this, but I am serious. That is not something the Plan Commission should really be concerned with. Plats, what are your buildings going to look like? We don't care at that stage. We don't care. If it's a rezone case, we care. A DPR, we care. A plat, we're just looking at the map. Are the lots in conformance? Are the roads in conformance? Those sorts of things. Okay, page 5, a rezone, and I have a strong opinion about this. You've heard me say it before, those of you who've been here a while, but a rezone is the time for the hard questions. Developers will say to you, well, I don't know all the answers and I don't know what everything's going to be, but the rezone is the stage at which we have the most latitude to say no. And the minute that a developer or petitioner believes you might say no, they then are in a position to improve the proposal to make it more amenable to you. That's what we call leverage. Okay, that's important. So I really do think that in rezones and PUDs, which are both rezones to me, that's the time where you can get really active and ask lots of questions about architecture, parking, traffic, drainage, all kinds of things, and you should.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
So when we're looking at things, especially like a PUD, and maybe to help Bill, as far as what we would like to see, because like I remember one case, we were talking about a traffic study. We didn't have a traffic study. It's like, well, the town council will address that. And I think we approved it. And I don't know if the town council actually addressed that, but it's I think that we should have all the evidence when we're looking at rezones that we're responsible for, because to make a recommendation on something we haven't seen really isn't doing justice to the town council. And I'd rather spend multiple meetings making sure the town gets a quality product, which is what comes with that rezone. So if the developer is serious about what they're wanting to do, I would expect that they would give that information, and then I'd look for you to either give that to us or cover it extensively if that's not in our packet.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know what the rest of the commission thinks, but I know we've had some large rezone packets in the past.
Yeah, I do try to do that. Some developments, I mean, the UDO has specific thresholds for a traffic study. And if it doesn't meet that threshold, I don't require it with filing. For instance, the hotel, the C2 rezoning, originally they said, well, it's going to be a 130 unit hotel. And I said, well, then you're going to need to provide a traffic study. And then they came back and said, well, it's actually going to be 119, which the threshold was 120 rooms. And so I said, okay. The only reason I was able to say okay was because they need a variance to go to 100. They need a height variance to go to 130. So they could do 119 and meet the height requirements, but they would need to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a variance. So I said, well, technically they really can't build a 130 room hotel. So I don't really have the teeth to require a TIS. But if the ordinance specifies it and they meet that threshold during a rezoning process, we require a traffic study.
Paul, I agree with you. I preach this every time. Okay, number 3, conditions and commitments. Make sure when we're asking for a commitment or imposing a condition that they are reasonably related to the waiver request. You'll see in there, for example, if the petitioner is asking for a waiver about landscaping, well, then we can ask for a condition, or we can impose a condition or ask for a commitment related to landscaping. Okay, that doesn't mean we're free to say no restaurants. Okay, that's land use now. We've just skipped all over. So there has to be a nexus. The cases talk about a nexus, a reasonable relationship between any condition we'd impose and the waiver being requested, or some other concern we have about the case. So if you're concerned about internal circulation and parking, well, then make your condition related to that. Okay, and that's completely legitimate. We just can't hop around a little bit. And I think you guys have done great in this, but it's something I always try to emphasize. Waivers, again, you're going to think about on a waiver, aside from the statutory criteria, the overall idea is, can we enhance the project and make it a little better? If we grant the waiver, is it better or isn't it better? And we want the answer to be yes. With this alternative, this would be better. Study your staff reports. Bill does a fantastic job. I'm not saying it because he's here. He does a fantastic job with his written staff reports. Some planning commissions don't get a staff report at all, or the ones they get are a paragraph. And I think I've always been proud of Avon. I think the staff reports have always been good, but Bill is the master. And I think what he does is you can read it and you can see what he's concerned about, and that should draw, your attention should be drawn to that. That makes your job easier. It's not like a mystery. It's not like some game we're playing where we have to try to figure out what the planner is concerned about. He lays it out for you.
So in other words, we have to make sure he never leaves also, right?
That's right. That's right. That's what I would say. Well, how many planners do you know can quote Hamlet? See, I'll just mention. Always make findings with your motions. Findings are very important. Also, I'm going to say that 18 times. Findings are very important. It is how we avoid our decisions from being overturned. Okay, it's how we have to make decisions. So I'll talk more about that later.
So Dan, I do have a question. So one of the things that I have heard mentioned both here and serving on the BCA is that one of the things that gets said regularly is why the balance between the standards and the ordinances and the granting of the waivers. And one thing that is regularly said is, what's the point of having ordinances if we're just going to waive them all the time? Can you give
Right.
us some guidance on that?
Yep. I've already said it. If the waiver enhances the project or makes it better, then that's what we want. I'll give you an example. And it was a case you all had. We have a requirement that landscaping must be planted all along the perimeter of the building. So if somebody has a drive-through, they don't want to put plants on the drive-through. And the carbon dioxide will kill the plants anyway. And so we have several times accepted a waiver of that requirement in an alternative landscape design, which took the same number of plants and put them elsewhere to make it better. That's a waiver which enhanced the project, made it better. So you have really a better perimeter view, and you don't have plants where they made no sense anyway. And that's a good example. Same way with some of your alternative exterior materials, like the car dealerships. They use glass and aluminum and steel. It looks fine. It's just that none of that's contemplated by your ordinance. So that's the purpose of waivers. Waivers are things that no one's entitled to them, and you should only grant them if you believe the change or the alternative enhances and makes the project better.
Another question then on that, maybe you're going to cover it here, but if we see waivers from developers on things like, I'm going to use like the overhangs, and that 3 foot is always going to be an impedance, they're always asking for 1 foot, our ordinance says 3 foot, is that where I would expect, Billy, either you would come and say, we need to modify our ordinances and that we would take that upon ourselves, or then can we request that staff bring a modification to that ordinance to be considered and recommended to the council?
Yeah, and the thing about architecture changes so much, so some of our standards, now you do have a new UDO, and that there were several really good architectural feature standards that were changed. But yeah, if you think that standard's time has passed, so to speak, and you're just granting waivers and no one wants to make it that way anymore, yeah, that's when you go and say, should we consider a text amendment to change that one? Yeah, very good point, actually. Okay, page 7, the advisory nature of the Plan Commission. You are advisory on some items, as I mentioned, but you're not advisory on others. So again, plats, DPRs, you're the final word. You're not really advisory about that. You're advisory on rezones, PUDs, text amendments, and comp plan. The composition of the Plan Commission, I'm not going to go through that with you, but it is all there. But I'm going to talk about conflicts of interest on page 8. You're going to hear me talk about 2 different kinds of conflict of interest. And that's because the law says that what rule applies depends on what kind of case you have in front of you. So if you have a legislative act case, which is a rezone, a PUD, text amendment, or comp plan, if you have one of those cases in front of you, then we have what I call the straight conflict of interest rule, which says that a member is disqualified if they have a pecuniary interest. So if you have any money interest in a case, you cannot participate, and you must disqualify yourself by notifying the secretary of the Plan Commission that you won't be participating, and then you have to leave the room. There is a case where the member recused themselves and then apparently was in the back of the room making gestures to the plan commission members who were still there. And somebody said, well, that disqualification didn't matter much because he was still in the room influencing the discussion. So when that happens, we usually kick you out. And I had this occur the other night and somewhere else, and the member didn't understand why he needed to leave. And I explained it to him and he said, okay. And I said, we usually cover this in training. So he said, well, I missed the training. I said, okay, well, if you missed the training, it's in writing right here. You will leave the room. So there's a list of legislative acts there for you. I made that list. So then what about the other cases? The other cases, the rule's a little different. It's bias, prejudice, and conflicts of interest. So it says that you're disqualified and may not participate if you are biased or prejudiced or otherwise unable to remain impartial, or you have a conflict of interest. So let's talk about biased and prejudiced. Biased and prejudice means that you cannot be impartial. Something about the case, you just can't be impartial. And this is rare, a rare thing, but as you might imagine, for people who don't like your decision, they like to use this provision of the law as a hammer, okay? They never think that you're biased as long as they agree with you, okay? They only think you're biased when you don't agree with them. So bias and prejudice. Now, I think of bias as meaning you are prejudiced in favor of something. And prejudice tends to have a negative connotation. So that generally means you're against something. But to the law, they mean the same thing. You have to have actual bias, your feeling has to be so strong, you really cannot impartially hear the case. That's the rule. And so what do you do if that happens? Again, you don't have a conflict of interest. You just feel like you are, the petitioner is your brother and you actually think that you couldn't be impartial. Now, somebody, that may be, or it may be your neighbor, or it could be someone you know well, and you think, well, I just think I can't vote against them. I don't think I can have an open mind about this. It's a rare thing, but it could happen. Now, conflict of interest in this setting is a little different. It basically means, again, pecuniary interest, but the courts have interpreted this rule a little differently than you might think. So there's the Perryworth case, which is cited there, said that the Plan Commission member didn't have any pecuniary interest in the case, but his wife owned an interest in adjacent land right next door to this proposal. And he apparently got sideways with somebody, however he voted. And so they raised it saying that his wife's interest in land, not of the petitioner, not subject to the petition, but next door, meant he should have not participated in the case. The court said, nope, that's not what we're looking for. Okay, that is not a conflict of interest because one, it's not his money and it's not the petitioner's land, it's an adjacent piece of land. And as long as he felt like he could still be impartial, he's good to go. And then in the fail case, the court said that you don't have to show the conflict affected anybody's judgment. If you have a conflict of interest, you're automatically out. It doesn't matter how fair you could be. You can't participate. Even if you say, I have a conflict of interest, but I can be fair, that's not the way that rule works. Okay.
So the conflict of interest is pretty tightly defined.
It is, yes.
How does the disqualification affect a quorum?
A disqualification doesn't affect a quorum, but as Bill mentioned earlier, you still need 4 votes. So in the Madison County case, which is the top of the next page, what the remonstrators tried to do was they tried to knock out so many people that they couldn't get 4 votes. And it was a very interesting technique because they alleged that 3 members of a 5-member plan commission or Board of Zoning Appeals were biased. One, because she was a friend of one of the landowners involved. One, because he was a member of a fraternal organization with the lawyer or something. And so they tried to knock out three, and again, all they have to really do is knock out enough so the vote isn't valid. So it was a 3-2 vote, and they attacked all three people who voted in the way they didn't want. And in that case, the court said, no. Knowing somebody is not enough. Being friends with somebody is not enough. You can't, it's not positional relationships we're looking for. You have to show actual lack of being able to be impartial. So that means you have to show that they are impartial. How do you prove that someone's impartial? It sounds difficult, but it's not really as hard as you think, because it's usually the person's own words, so person's own words. So here, I heard for years, I will never approve apartments. Okay, sounds like that person lost his impartiality, right? Okay, that would have been able to be challenged. He said it over and over in public meetings. So he's just creating a great case. If you bring an apartment case, you'd expect the petitioner to get up and say, well, I'm here to present a case. And before we get started, Mr. Zuzan, I'm questioning his qualification here, because he has said over and over again, he'll never approve any apartments regardless of what the case is all about. And I think he can't be impartial. So it's often one's very words that get them into this trouble. It's not about how closely you know someone. It's all about your impartiality. And in the Madison County case, which involved windmills, in that case, the remonstrators were very much against them. And all the things they were talking about was just somebody knew somebody. Now, they didn't really even allege they were impartial. They just said, Judge, they must be impartial because of the relationship. And the court said, that's not enough. Okay, so we're looking for a time where you feel that because of your relationship with someone, you just couldn't be impartial. You'd have to either agree with them, or it could be that you don't like them. We had that here once. And we had a member tell me, I can't stand that guy. I can't be impartial. I don't like him. I'm going to vote no. I know I'm going to vote no. I don't care what he says. I don't care if he wants to build a church. I don't care. And I said, well, then you need to not participate. And that's what we did. And he just felt that way. So you can see I put in some examples there of what might cause it. Action by the commission, Bill covered that, and I'm glad he did. You always need 4 votes, and that's rare. Most public bodies only need to have a quorum and then have a majority of people present, people voting, and so you have a special rule. Okay, page 11, I start with some of the types of cases you hear, the 5 criteria at the bottom of page 11. Again, you should know those backward and forward. If you go to page 12, the thing to know about them, and this is important, is no single criteria governs. It is the totality of those 5. Okay, the totality of those circumstances. And so there are plenty of cases where the comp plan said, yeah, that's fine. And the town council said, well, even though that's true, we think we still don't want it. And the courts every time said, well, it's not just a comp plan, it's all 5 factors. And if the totality makes that lean against, that's okay. And so you're gonna see that several times also. It's what is that? And the case I cited for you, the Madison County case, talked about the limitations of the comp plan. It's a vision, and it has to be applied on that day. It's not an ordinance, it's just a vision of what you want your community to look like. And sometimes people, I think especially members of the public, put too much weight into the comp plan. I've never ever thought that anybody put too little weight in it. And it's almost like, well, whatever the comp plan says. No, that's one of 5 factors. The standard of review in the middle of page 12, very important. Courts are going to let you do what you do unless you are arbitrary and capricious. What does that mean? Arbitrary and capricious means you had no reason for what you did, is what it means. How are the courts going to determine if you were arbitrary or capricious? They're going to look at the transcript of your meeting, or in this day and age, thanks to Jared, watch your meeting, and they're going to see what findings you made, and then they're going to try to figure out if those findings were based upon information that was actually in front of you, either in the staff report or something you heard at the meeting. So for example, let's go back to a rezone. If you are inclined to say, look, I don't really want to support this, then what you want to do is you want to ask the petitioner questions about the factors you think that work against them. So what do you think this is, how's traffic going to work? What do you think the burden of the schools is going to be based upon your proposal? Is your proposal harmonious with the land right next door? You've got commercial, right? You've got residential all around you, and you want to put in an amusement park. That seems to be disharmonious. You ask the petitioner questions, and that's the way you lay the groundwork for your findings. You have to have a rational basis for that. And the courts have said it's not enough just to fill out the form Bill gives you and making a motion. You actually have to discuss this stuff. Have to discuss it. So again, I know that you guys have done a good job. Robert, at the last meeting, felt like we didn't touch a couple of the factors, and he asked about them, which I thought was awesome. That's exactly what I'd want you to do. And we should add about those 5, if we're doing a rezone or PUD, those 5 things, we should ask at least one question on each of those. And that's what we should do. Planned unit developments on page 13. I'm just going to touch on this a little bit because
Dan, if I could just interrupt lightly, I see you have a Westlaw citation for the Madison County case. Do you have an actual reporter site?
not yet, but I can get it for you.
Thank you.
The thing about PUDs is, this is the scary part. We're going to let them write their own ordinance. So that means we better look at that ordinance very carefully. For example, they're going to say in that ordinance what land uses are allowed. So think about it. In your UDO, you have pages and pages of a permitted use table. Okay, none of that applies. They're going to write their own permitted use table. So you need to pay attention to the actual ordinance. The pictures are great. I know, all the renderings, what it's going to look like, that's all nice. But I think we need to really look carefully at what their ordinances say. What does it say about land use? What does it say about architectural standards? What does it say about changes? What does it say about, this will seem silly, what does it say about definitions? Because if they define terms differently than our UDO, that definition matters. Or if they omit definitions. I had a case recently in another jurisdiction where they chose not to define multifamily housing. They didn't define it at all. And so then the question became, is a townhouse multifamily? Is a condo multifamily? Well, nobody knew. And in that case, that town's ordinance, although 700 pages long, also didn't define these terms. So the poor planner was left to make an interpretation. And we went to the building code, Bill, and to Webster's is how we made a determination there. Definitions are really important. How do they define things? How are those definitions different from the way we define those same terms in the UDO?
So are there,
Right now with specialty housing.
Mm-hmm.
well, so that kind of gets to my question is, do we have the authority by statute to add language into our ordinances that says, this is our definition of multifamily housing or specialty housing, and this cannot be changed by any, we see this in statutes a lot. This is what it is, and you can't change it by a term of a contract. You can't change it by any other way. This is what it is, even if you write it differently.
I don't think you can do that. The PUD statute says they're going to write an ordinance. Now, you can say, we're not going to approve PUDs that define that way. Okay, and you could say to the petitioner, will you please change your definition to match our definition? And they can say no, or they can say yes. That's how you handle it. Any specialty housing, multifamily, townhouses, condominiums, all those things, sometimes those, we discovered, Paul, remember, we once had a big discussion over what masonry meant.
I remember that.
Okay, what does it mean? And I'm dealing with a very large PUD right now with multiple phases, and there are about 7 definitions. There need to be 100 definitions. There are 7. And the petitioner, the developer, he doesn't even know what the answers are. It's such a bad, that particular section, it's a nice development, but there are no definitions. And so then if there are no definitions, you default back to our UDO. But if our UDO doesn't define it, where are we? And so we need to look hard at definitions.
So our enforcement of the guardrails that we would put upon a petitioner written ordinance would be to tell them ahead of time, these are our criteria. And if you, similar to what we were saying earlier, and if you do not meet these criteria, we will not pass it, even though, so if you're going to write your own ordinance, you need to make sure that you stay in line with what we have.
I don't think Bill can say it quite that way. I think Bill can say, historically, the Planning Commission has been unlikely to approve, or the town council has been unlikely to approve PUDs that contain these provisions. But we are under law obligated to look at each case on its own.
Does a PUD have a right to have their ordinance approved legally?
Nope, discretionary.
So they can't go to court and just say, hey, they gave us the right to do this ordinance. We wrote this ordinance, and they just refused to pass it.
Right, that's why I say, you could say, look, we really don't like the way you've defined multifamily housing. We think it needs to have 5 other definitions. Would you be willing to change that? If they say no, you can just make a negative recommendation to the town council and hope that they follow you. That's your power.
Okay.
Okay. We've talked before, but I think PUDs deserve even more scrutiny than a rezone. It's the thing that deserves the most scrutiny, so that they're using them in ways that the town wants them to be used. And I would check to make sure the PUD is consistent with the purposes of PUDs and UDOs. And Bob Culler mentioned this a little bit, but I've listed them for you right there. And I would also, if there's phasing involved, make sure we understand phasing right. Okay, text amendments. The only thing I'm going to say about that is there is a new law that says that the Planning Commission must decide what recommendation it's going to make on a text amendment within 60 days of the public hearing. Prior, there was no timetable, and now there's a timetable. So just be aware of that. So that's one of the rules we need to change. Development plan review. Again, I think there's a lot there on a development plan review, but Bill does a good job of laying it out for you, whether it complies or not. And again, that is a ministerial review. And I think those should be a little easier than we make them sometimes, just my opinion. Now, if they request waivers or they're not compliant, well, then it's still easy, just the other direction, Okay, special issues on page 17. I preach a little about findings again, and again, it's just really good. We need to make good findings. We need to ask the right questions, and then we need to actually make those waivers. Again, I've talked about this before, but the 3 criteria are, are they going to enhance the project and meet the other statutory requirements? No right to a waiver. Have to vote on the waiver first, and you guys do a good job of that. The open door law, pages 17 through 19. I have a bunch of information about the open door law. I'm not going to go through this with you, but I tried to be pretty thorough about this. The big thing to remember is that if 4 of you are together, it's probably a meeting. And the only exception to that for you is that all 7 of you could go out to a site visit, stand there, look around. You can look and you can visit the site. You can't talk much about it, but you can go visit the site together. I'd never have known anybody do that together, but if you can do that, that's fine. Remember that any email that you send to each other is subject to the Access to Public Records Act, any text messages you send. So I always say, unless you want the email posted on the front of the town hall, please don't put it in the email. Our Lupa, I just want to mention, there is this federal law which says that you cannot discriminate against a religious institution. If they come to you for planning and zoning, you have to treat it just like any commercial building. Okay, it doesn't matter what religion they are. You can't make comments about their religion. And you might think, well, who would do such a thing? But there are lots of cases on it. And my favorite case is is out in Rocky Mountain, Colorado, where the Planning Commission president said, when the petitioner came forward, "Oh, you're from that weird church." Yeah, so we were off to a good start right away, right? We don't want to ask them any questions about their religious practices or what they do in those buildings. You just have to treat it just like a school or a hospital or whatever similar building would be. Okay.
Now, that could be problematic. So for instance, I think we're all familiar with the rezoning up in Westfield or Carmel.
Carmel.
And how do you ask the question? I mean, it's a practicality thing, but is there going to be a call to prayer that could impact, that could be disruptive to the community versus, is that asking a legitimate land use question?
That's
or
okay,
is it-
sure, yeah. Just like we often say, are there going to be out any exterior intercoms on your industrial site? You can ask that. You just can't say that I'm not going to approve them because they're Muslim.
Right.
Yeah.
So language matters.
Right. My recommendation is to just remove all that and look at it like it's a school, or it's a commercial business. Some of these churches are large now anyway. And they have different but just treat it like an institutional building. Page 20, I come back to rezones and give you some other information. And there's the 5 criteria again. Other best practices, read your ordinances. I mean, I think once a year you ought to try to at least skim that and you'll see something you've not seen before. Don't hesitate to vote no. I've said this before. I mean, if you think it's if you think it's a rotten idea, we don't have to go an hour and a half for you to get there. Okay? You have the right. And if it's a rezone or PUD, you're just making a recommendation to the town council anyway. And I think sometimes, not just for you, but for all the planning commissions I work with, there's this real reluctance. But like if you have a negative recommendation from staff and you think it's terrible, and you hear what the petitioner has to say, and you hear what the people to say, you don't have to talk about it for 45 minutes. You can say, I agree with staff report and what's been said here. I think this is bad for these 2 reasons. I make a motion and just make the silly motion.
I just want to add and highlight, he's talking about the findings. Just make sure you speak on those findings. That's it. Just give us the good reasons.
Right. That's why I said those 2 things you don't like about it. Yeah, get to those. But you guys have been better about that of late, but for years and years, I've thought, just someone say, make a motion. It's easy to make a motion. Approving, sometimes there's a hesitation. Okay. Page 22, I have a little more information there on commitments and nexus. And so I'm going to talk a little bit in the time I have left on some cases. So the Burton versus Madison County case is that case I mentioned earlier about them challenging on the basis of bias, but they also challenged, and Paul, you're on the BZA, aren't you? Somebody else, who else is on the BZA? Oh, you are, Catherine. So you'll love this. So in addition to that, they challenged because one of the board members no longer lived in the county. No longer lived there, still participating. I don't know why. And believe it or not, there is a rule that says, well, if you're going to question that, you have to do that before the vote. And they didn't. And so the court said, well, there's this old doctrine called the de facto officer doctrine, which says that if you don't raise it before there are votes, it doesn't even matter they weren't residents. Okay? If we allow that to happen, then I don't know how the law would mean anything. So there was that case had another interesting part. The Chapo case at the bottom of the page, same sort of thing. Some of the members had failed to take their oaths and file them, and the court said again, you have to raise that before they vote. You can't go back later and try to attack them. The Minsner case on 24 was interesting because the case was whether or not the landowners had built a pond on their property. Now, where I come from, I think most people agree what a pond is, but apparently in this case up in DeKalb County, the petitioner said, no. There is this low area in my yard that is now filled with water, but I didn't intend to create a pond. That just happened. We moved some dirt and then this pond was larger than an acre. It wasn't a puddle. It was larger than an acre. So in that case, the court said, look, the intent of the person, the landowner, doesn't matter. If it meets the definition of a pond, and in this case it did, it's a pond. And it doesn't matter whether you intended to create a pond or not. You did in fact create a pond, and you're not going to be allowed to do that. Bottom of page 24, B&S of Fort Wayne was a sexually oriented business case. And in that case, they challenged the constitutionality of that. I mention this because you have a provision in your UDO like this and have had for some time. And in that case, in a big win for municipalities, the court said, look, they passed this ordinance to fight crime that studies have shown is attracted to these types of businesses, and that is perfectly legitimate and constitutional. So that was good. We kind of had to hold our breath on that one until it was issued. The Nova Groder case I like a lot on page 25, because in that case, the whole case came down to what a commitment said. And the neighborhood they were very concerned in 1993 about a Walgreens going into an addition in Irvington, I believe. And 20 years later, Walgreens went out of business. And the neighbors said there can only be a Walgreens because commitment number 7 says so. And the court said, well, yeah, but if you read 8, 9, and 10, it kind of says if it's not a Walgreens, it can only be these kinds of businesses. You can't pick out what you want. You have to read the commitments in total. And by the way, reminding all of us, the court said, we don't favor commitments that limit the use of real estate. So if that's what you want to do, you better be good about it. The lesson of this case is make sure your commitments say what you mean. Because 20 years later, or 21 in this case, they came back and tried to say, what did we mean 21 years later? So when we do commitments and bill and work with the petitioners, and sometimes I get involved, but when you're asking for commitment, let's make sure we're getting the words right. Because in this case, the words really mattered and came back, and the neighborhood association thought they had them right where they wanted. But a court said, well, if you are right, why would you need 8, 9, and 10? We have to read them all together. Hemsel, which you haven't dealt with this yet, but Hemsel is a Hendricks County case where someone challenged the constitutionality of the Indiana Right to Farm Act because they allow confined feeding operations. And the court said the Right to Farm Act is completely constitutional. It overrides all zoning laws. And the reason it's constitutional is because the state legislature has decided that our having food is more important than zoning. And that's the way it is. And that's what that
So
case.
even though this is a direct conflict with Nova Groder, which says municipalities have the right to zone the way they want.
Now, Nova Groder just said, what does the commitment mean? And a commitment is something that the petitioner in 1993 voluntarily agreed to.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah. Nova Groder was, it's an interesting case. It just talks about how careful you have to be. Hemsel, which was a brother who used to be a pig farmer suing his brother who was still a pig farmer. There they attacked the constitutionality of the Right to Farm Act, which is a big deal. And it was a big case, and it came down and said to all of us, municipalities, you're not going to be able to overcome the Right to Farm Act. Okay, monster trash is just a good case for staff to know. There, the IDEM said, well, before we issue a permit for your trash operation, you have to get us a letter from that jurisdiction saying there's nothing you need from them. And there was nothing they needed from them, but the but the staff refused to provide the letter because they didn't want the landfill there. And the court said, you can't do that. They end up paying attorney's fees, so you want to watch that. Now, I'm going to finish with old cases worth knowing. So this is, I just wanted to highlight for you some cases we don't talk about, but really underpin a lot of our training. So Borsig is kind of the most famous case. The first time the court said, hey, no single criteria controls. And it was a case that planning attorneys all should know. And so that in the city of Madison, if you've been to Madison, you know there's the downtown's full of businesses, lots of tourism. And so the question there is always, somebody wants to put a restaurant somewhere along the main drag and they're surrounded by houses. And so this was one of those cases where they didn't want to put that in there. So they wouldn't go from residential business. They denied it. And the petitioner appealed and they said, look, it's not arbitrary and capricious. Let's see. We looked at the record and the town council was concerned about traffic, property values, harmony of intended uses, recommendations of the comp plan, drainage issues, and privacy. That seemed like they had reasons for their decision. We don't care if they're right. Did they have reasons for their decision? And so that became kind of an interesting case. Vanderburg versus 3I. In that case, the real big thing was they were concerned about how this new business might affect the planned expansion of one of their major roads. And so they didn't want a new traffic center coming in where they'd already done their traffic study and they'd already made these big plans. And the court said, that's another good reason. You can do that. That can be one of your reasons. The town of Schererville case was also interesting because even though the PUD was consistent with the comp plan, the town of Schererville, the town council said, well, you know what? The factor they latched onto there was the utilities couldn't support this new development. And they didn't know how they were going to do that. Probably would cause the town to have to enlarge its utilities and expand their sanitary plant, for example. Courts again said that's completely a legitimate thing. That's number 5, responsible growth and development on your 5 criteria. So that's fine. And then the last 2 cases, Carpenter and Brandt, were both plat cases. And you don't see many plat cases, but these were the 2 that kind of informed us, again, that these are ministerial decisions. In the Carpenter case, the court said specifically that just because all of the neighbors don't want you to approve the plat, because they don't want the development that will eventually arise from that plat, that's not enough. This is not a popularity contest. If it complies, it flies. And then Brandt, same thing, which said, look, this is not discretionary. There is no discretion in a plat case that complies. Now, if they ask for a waiver, you've got discretion on the waiver only, not on the whole case. So I had to go back a little ways and find those 77 and 97, those 2 cases. But that is just a kind of a nice reminder that I'm just not making all this up. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I think it would be nice if we could hear from council about what it is and is not appropriate behavior in terms of the planning commission members and when we are dealing with petitioners, potential to petitioners that are coming before us. We're a small community. We often see the same people in front of us frequently. It's not unusual for there to be personal friendships and relationships between members of our town government and people who may come before us. I was just wondering if you could speak some to that.
Well, yeah. First of all, when we're here, we just want to be professional toward everyone. Okay, that's in terms of behavior. In terms of interaction, there's no rule which says that a planning commission member cannot talk to a petitioner or citizen about a case. I don't recommend it because anything you were to say could be used as a way to attack you on the issue of bias or prejudice. I think you should, when someone, and I know it happens, but if a petitioner were to call you about a rezone, let's just say, and I know if I were a plan commission member, I would say, look, I'm not going to talk to you about that case. That's something that I will hear. I'll hear what you have to say and I'll make my best judgment at the hearing. That's my advice to you, because then if somebody says, well, did you talk to them about it? You can say, no, I did, but I told them I wouldn't talk about the substance of their case. That's my recommendation to you, because it prevents you from being just someone potentially trying to disqualify you because you have some relationship with either side. People think about a relationship you might have or a conversation you might have with a developer, but the rule is exactly the same if it's an interest group that opposes certain types of zoning decisions. Same deal. You could be biased if you're a member of the No Apartments in Avon organization, which doesn't really exist. I'm making this up, but if there were one, and you were very, you had lots of conversations with them, and then a developer might come in and say, well, Greg, I think you should be disqualified. I know you're active in that group, and I know that you've said certain things, and so again, in order to discharge the duties of your positions, you need to keep yourself as neutral as you can. Now, the BZA has a different rule. You are not allowed to talk to anybody there. And some towns have a rule that says you can't talk to anybody. I don't really favor that, because I don't really think, I really don't think that's necessary. But in terms of best practice, if I were in a plan commission, I would tell both sides, if you want to send me something, that's fine, but I'm not going to comment on it, and I'm not going to talk to you directly about any pending matter you have before us or will be coming before us. And I see, from where I sit, I see emails on both sides, developer emails, interest group emails. And as soon as you start to engage with them, well, then here you go. You're going to get lots of that. And so I don't recommend it, but it's not against the law, not against the rules.
Is it something that if we wanted to, we could add into our rules and our procedures that would just make, because I know we don't have anything now. Is that something that you would recommend, not recommend?
You could do that. I don't recommend it, because I think that, for example, I could talk to a developer's attorney or a developer, and while I'm on a plan commission, and be completely unswayed by anything they would say to me. I don't, that's just the way I am. I don't think that every communication creates a problem. But I do think perception's important, and I think, it's important to just stay as neutral as you can and make your decisions based upon what you hear in this room, and not decisions you had, information you heard at lunch with that interest group or that developer. And see, people try to play this, developers will say, well, I don't like Harold, he's close to these people who are against this, and I know he's talking to them. I know he had a barbecue or whatever. Okay, that's what developers will say. I hear that from their lawyers. In the same respect, then I hear the opposite. I hear people from the interest group saying, well, I know that they're a little cozy with that guy. And I think, well, heavens, I've been here a long time. I don't think we're cozy. I don't think we're cozy with anybody. Really, I don't. So, but there is this perception you have to fight. So, being Switzerland is still my best advice. Be neutral. Be very careful about your communications, and and just try to be it gets back to impartiality, and try to make decisions based on this. Now, the BZA, you have a hard and fast rule, no communications. I like that, because the BZA is different than Plan Commission. And I think some towns that have this rule that says you can't have any communication with members of the Plan Commission miss the point. The BZA, you are acting like judges. That's what the law says. You are quasi judicial. It is, the case gets presented, and it's either a ball or a strike. You guys decide, and you can only consider evidence heard during the case. Plan Commission is a little different. You can go visit the site. BZA can't go see the site. You can't go stand there. You're not supposed to. You're supposed to be right here in this room. Plan Commission members, a little broader, a little bigger picture. And the other thing is, think about in a rezone. Okay, Paul, who may have strong opinions, I've seen Paul have strong opinions. He's not going to decide a single rezone case until he runs for town council. See, it's an advisory opinion, right? So see, I don't think that anyone should take that seriously if you understand what the Plan Commission is. I just think it's worrying about nothing. That's just my opinion. The other thing is the people who complain about it are always the people who don't agree with the decision. It's very outcome driven. If they like your decision, you guys deny a rezone, and everybody's happy about that except the developer. The developer's the guy who's going to say, well, I think Catherine's a little cozy with so-and-so. And that's why she voted no. It might be that you just didn't like it, but see, that's how that's going to come out. So you could do it. I don't recommend it. I think there is a difference between a BZA and a plan commission. Plan commission is supposed to be big picture policy on legislative matters, making recommendations to the final decision makers, town council. BZA, you're it. And it is. You have 30 minutes, by golly, you hear that case and you decide, and that is final. Not advisory to anybody, and you're just like an umpire. It was either a ball or it was a strike. And just like an umpire, it is whatever you say it is. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Does that conclude the training portion of our evening?
Except for the quiz.
Pop quiz time. Okay, then do we have any committee reports? I know the BZA did not meet this
Yeah,
month.
nothing, the BZA didn't meet, and there's nothing as of now on September's agenda either. So
Okay, any other committee reports? Nope, okay. Is there anything for the good of the order that needs to be said?
Just one thing,
What's that?
I'd like to say happy birthday to Mr. Taylor.
Oh, happy birthday.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Yesterday.
Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome, Mr. Taylor.
In that case, if that's all we have, then do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We are adjourned.